friend asked me to comment on this talk at the World Economic Forum by Professor Yuval Noah Harari called "Will the Future Be Human?" And I found what I wanted to address is not so much what he actually says, which is very well explained, but the reaction of the presenter Gillian Tett, who says this is a terrifying view of the future. Now, the reason is that I've come across that in the media. I'm not particularly into this subject, but I've heard people saying it's terrifying, the fear of artificial intelligence, the threat of artificial intelligence, or even the threat of finding more intelligent beings from outer space arriving on our planet. And the idea seems to be that high intelligence is a form of power. To have high intelligence is to have power over. And the broader argument is that this planet is dominated by Homo sapiens. And the word sapiens means knowing. It is our intelligence that has given us dominance of this planet. And so if we create a far higher intelligence artificially, will that too come to dominate the planet and therefore to dominate us? And is that thought disturbing? And many people find it to be disturbing or terrifying, as she said. Now, I have argued in the past that one of the best responses if you're feeling terrified, unless you enjoy feeling terrified, like in a fairground ride, is to start asking questions. And I'm rather glad that she said this, we really ought to open up this discussion, because all I'm going to do is ask some questions around that point about how terrifying it would be. Now, the first thing I notice is that in the media, when I've heard this idea quoted of a threat of artificial intelligence and similar things, that the people quoted are very intelligent people who really know their subject. Now that produces a dual response in me. There's the one that the media seems to expect, which is, if intelligent people are saying this, they must know what they're talking about, so we have to listen. But there's also a more rebellious side of me which says, they would say that, wouldn't they? You see, if the world heavyweight boxing champion were to pick me up by the scruff of the neck, hold his fist in front of my face and say, might is right, I'd be inclined to agree with him. But when he put me down and when I was safely at a distance, I'd think, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? You see, there's something a bit self-serving about highly intelligent people suggesting that high intelligence is the key to dominance. Now, at an individual level, you could easily show that this surely isn't so. Who are the people who are dominating our society today? Trump, May, Putin, these big names. They're not outstandingly the most intelligent people on the planet. And similarly, if you take the people who are terribly intelligent, like the people making these pronouncements, the professors and the academics, are they the people who are leading this, who are dominating the planet? No, they're not. In fact, if anything, I'd say their influence is less than the influence of pop stars and celebrities. So obviously, sort of in an individual way, in an individual way, this isn't true. But the question is it true in a sort of a group sense? Going back to the idea of Homo sapiens being the one who has dominated this planet. Sapiens means the knowing one. And it sort of makes sense, doesn't it? The idea that there were all these other types of homos, different sort of species of advanced hominids, and they all were wiped out, leaving only Homo sapiens. Obviously, it's the sapiens bit that did it. Now that is sort of quite an attractive idea. I think it's sort of taken for granted. But I don't know if it really stands up, because more recently I think there's been evidence that there was quite a bit of crossbreeding between humans and Neanderthals, and there might well have been with some of these other species. So it could be that it isn't so much that our intelligence was the thing that squashed the others, as maybe Homo sapiens was sexier. Maybe we should really call ourselves homosexual. There's a pun there, actually, two different meanings of the word homo. But that, you see, sets me thinking that, is it really, are we just assuming it was the intelligence, the higher mind was the thing that caused our dominance? I think you could make a very similar argument that it was that we are the most religious species on the planet, and that is why we're dominant. I would present it like this. I'm using the word religious in my understanding of it, which is the ability of humans in a big group to totally dedicate themselves to some abstract idea, whether it's a god or a way of life, as with communists or Buddhists, or whether it is an area of land marked out, a nation, and that people are prepared, or tribalism if you like, people are prepared to sort of fight to the death for this abstract notion. Now, this isn't unheard of in the animal kingdom, because after all, any herd animal, a pack of dogs, pack of wolves, will fight to the death for the others. And it's certainly true in the insect kingdom, that ants and bees will fight to the death. But it's one thing to fight to the death as part of a crowd, with them all around you. But I don't think there's any animal that would do the equivalent of a human being who will go and live for several years in the enemy culture and then one day put on an explosive vest in order to destroy people, the enemy, and himself at the same time. I think we are the most religious species on Earth, and you could see why that gives us immense power over other animals. It's that herd thing where we can come together and battle, and that could well be why we're dominant rather than sheer intelligence. Now, you could also argue, and it's a bit harder work, we're also the most artistic species on the planet, and maybe that is why we're dominant. A piece of music, a symbol, can bring out such feelings in us that we will fight for that. We will go to battle behind a banner. You could argue possibly that the last World War was really a battle between Marlene Dietrich singing Lily Marlene and who was it who sang White Cliffs of Dover? Anyway, you know what I mean. That what actually drove people very often is a piece of music, something which brings us together. And that is another very powerful thing that could lead to world dominance. Now, if you know my idea of the four cultures, you'll see what's coming next. I would say we're not only the most rational species on Earth, we're also the most irrational. And we see it in our humour. Weaver birds build beautiful nests, but I've never seen a Dadaist nest or a surreal nest by a weaver bird. There's a craziness about us as well. Now, if I propose that maybe that is what made us so dominant, I'm not just being totally lonely eccentric, because in the 1950s, which was a very rational decade, there was a whole sort of genre of science fiction in which tremendously intelligent beings from outer space descended and began to destroy humanity, with their ray guns, their death rays, and their zappers and things like that, And to make a good story out of it, always they ended up being defeated. And the closing scene tended to be along the lines of, they were masters of the universe. They knew everything. They had every power that there was. But they totally underestimated the sheer doggedness of the human spirit. Or else they just didn't understand the power of human love, of a man for a woman, whatever. So I felt that at that time of high rationality, there was still a sort of undercurrent of feeling amongst people, amongst the public, that superintelligence, for all the power it can give you, is not actually enough to be totally dominant. So what I'm doing here is not arguing against what he's saying, but just saying maybe there are more questions we should be asking before we allow ourselves to be terrified. He talks about the power of data and a government that knows so much about us that it could predict us. Now, more than 40 years ago, in Thundersqueak, I wrote a note to future tyrants. Good day, tyrant. You've just come to power, or so you believe. You have handled a file called Potential Subversive Elements for Investigation and Elimination, and in it you have found my writing. With a memo to the effect its author could be a dangerous destabilizing element in an ordered society, and ask your opinion what action you'd like to take. Now, I go on to say that he thinks he has control over me because of his knowledge. Let me describe your dream. I know it so well. As you study those files, you believe that science is on your side and can solve all the problems. Your police are busy issuing identity cards for the population, and secret computer files are being prepared. Scientists have told you as long as you can collect enough information about the population, you will be able to predict it utterly. Your file contains facts about my intelligence, my stability, my extroversion, my love life, my reading taste, my political leanings. Now you think you know me. And I say, no, you don't. Because I can still be unpredictable. You could learn about me for 100 years and I could still surprise you. Study all the facts about me and remember for 100 years and I'll still be able to surprise you. Because none of these facts are enough to pin me down. This annoys your scientists. They now have a new supercomputer with 1,000 times the capacity of the old one. They're going to ask you to insist on knowing more about me, my chromosomes, my metabolism, my ECG brainwaves, my sleeping habits, etc., etc., etc. All this will be fed into the machine. Then they're sure they'll know all about me and be able to predict my every move. Can you see the mirage that they're seeking? They believe if they were given enough facts about me or any other potentially dangerous person, they could model that person inside a computer and say gain absolute power over them. Now I point out that this is actually a dream, which is an old dream. Whether it's voodoo dolls or witchcraft, puppets or whatever. The idea that you could make a model of someone and then have control over them. I go on to say there's a paradox here. There is an inbuilt paradoxical snag. If they succeed in creating a computer model of me, then they will have not one, but two rebels on their hands. How can the computer simulacrum of me be a total description of me unless it possesses its own consciousness, its own ability to understand the situation of its creation, and its own ability to sabotage the system with deceitful responses to input stimuli? In other words, they've only really got me completely in their system when they've got me completely in their system. And now they've got two rebels. One is inside. Now, people have said to me since, yeah, but you see, if it's inside the system, it's And I say containment is still not dominance. And I give the example of in South Africa, the apartheid government. They managed to catch Mandela and contain him. And if anything, he became even more effective anti-apartheid fighter when he was in prison. Containing him didn't reduce his influence. If anything, it increased it around the world. I think that there's a real paradox here, and I haven't really seen it addressed very much in these discussions about, the dangers of big business and government knowing too much about us. My own experience of it is, I've been buying things online for 20 years, that actually, if that's the best that big data can do, and everyone's saying, wow, it's so powerful, it's absolute crap. This torrent of advertising I get, and it's just so irrelevant. They're suggesting I buy books which I might already have bought. I mean, if their intelligence couldn't have discovered that already. I haven't seen any social media analysis of me or anything which is half as good as a good salesman who looks you up and down and says, I think I may have just the right thing for you. They've got a long way to go before it's anything as good as that. And yet people are already getting terrified of it. Now, I say that addressing this in the individual basis is one thing, and it clearly isn't true that intelligence equals dominance. But if we're looking at the bigger picture, then I think that the intelligence they make would have to be not only many times more rational than us, it also have to be many times more religious than us, many times more artistic than us, and many times more irrational than us. And that's asking a hell of a lot. I won't say it can't be done, because after all, if they really do manage to reproduce our entire sort of nervous system, then they've got that as a model. But what I'm saying is that these are questions which I haven't really seen referred to when people start saying they're terrified of the idea of artificial intelligence. I think there are many questions like this that need to be asked. And that it's not so much, I'm not arguing that what he says may not happen, but the fearfulness of it, I'm not so sure about. You see, the superintelligence they're talking about is absolute specialization, specializing in intelligence. Now, the evidence that I see that specialization is not a great evolutionary advantage. The thing about humans, in a way, is that they're so unspecialized. And in fact, in my years of magical thinking, where I give this model of, religion, science, magic, religion and art, what I say is that there's this idea that I was taught that most primitive thinking is magical, and then you get artistic ability, and then you get religion, and then the highest form of thinking is scientific thinking, rational thinking. And that linear idea of progress is put across as what I was told I should believe in. And yet my own observation is that after a period of scientific thinking, very often we see a return of magical thinking. Religion, far from being an old-fashioned way of thinking which has been left in the past by scientific advance, every now and again there's a religious revival. And then there are periods through history when suddenly artistic abilities flourish and art flourishes. And I put forward this idea that actually there's a sort of a churn. We go through these different ways of thinking. and that maybe it is that lack of specialization which has made us so dominant, which is the fact that the tiger with his strength, the dinosaur with its size, the whale with its size, all these things that have conquered a niche by specializing in one particular thing, they're all endangered species. And that really it's non-specialization which is our real dominant strength. And so to create something which specializes and be super intelligent, is that really the secret to dominance in the world? I'm not sure that it is. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm just saying I think there are questions to be asked here which I haven't heard addressed in a big way in the current argument. The speaker who introduces him says we need more discussion around these points, or something to that effect. And I'm really just putting some of the questions I think I would like to hear discussed as part of that debate. I made the mistake of listening to this video and I wasn't totally satisfied with it. I thought possibly instead of a lot of questions I should present it more as a short argument like this. There's an idea that I was brought up with and many people believe in the way that human thinking has progressed. It began with an attempt to come to terms with or make a relationship with the environment, and that is magical thinking. Over the centuries we learnt to shape our environment in artistic thinking, and from that came the desire to explain the universe we live in, religious thinking. And out of that endeavour eventually came science, and now we understand the universe we're in. And that's presented as a sort of linear progress and evolution from a primitive past to the present. Now, in my years of magical thinking, I argue against that. I say that actually, if you actually look at the past, rather than that smooth progression, you have huge religious revivals, you have magical revivals, you have periods of high art that come and go, that actually there's a churn going all the time. And I argue that maybe that churn, the fact we haven't specialized, is really the secret to our evolutionary success rather than the specialization. You see, a whale came to dominate the ocean by specializing in size. But now some humans build ships which are bigger than a whale, and the whale has become an endangered species. The tiger dominated the jungle by being very fierce. Some people are even fiercer than tigers. The tiger's endangered. Birds dominated the air by learning to fly, but some humans take flying lessons. It is this spread of things we do rather than pure intelligence, which I suggest is the key to our evolutionary success. So if we build something which is specializing in this, we're so in awe of this idea that we are Homo sapiens, the only ones, we build something to specialize in that. Will we just be building another dependent, endangered species that we're going to have to put our time into looking after it? You see, there is another form of dominance, which is not the dominance of the tyrant, but the dominance of the needy or the dependent. And maybe, just as I find that with every advance in my Macintosh software, I actually have to spend more time and money keeping it up to date and looking after it and sorting out its bugs than the time I spend working on it. Maybe that is the future. We're going to be slaves to an intelligence which is always on the point of suicide.